Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox, recording here to talk about 4 audio production steps, crucial steps that amateurs foolishly skip over. Now, if you are new to home recording and production, you probably think of production in 3 separate stages: recording, mixing, and mastering. Well, I have news for you. Those aren't all of the stages. As a matter of fact, recording I consider to actually be stage 3. Mixing is stage 5, and mastering is the final stage, which I consider to be stage 7. So let's think. That leaves us stages 1, 2, 4, and 6 that so many home studio owners tend to just not even pay attention to, and it's probably holding you back. So let's talk about stage 1 that you're probably skipping over. Maybe. I hope not, but you probably are. And that is the pre-production stage. Here's the problem with home recording. Because we can record whenever we want, we tend to kind of just gloss over songwriting and pre-production, and we obsessed about what amp sim we're going to use or what drum software we're going to use. We record riffs, and then we try to master these riffs even though the song isn't done. Here's the thing. There's a reason why pros focus so much on the pre-production phase before they even think about microphones and plugins and outboard gear or any of that stuff. And that's because you cannot mix and master a pro-level song if you don't have the foundation solid and right in the first place. And I'm a home studio owner myself and a project studio owner myself, and way back in the day, I was definitely guilty of this. I was so obsessed with mixing that I forgot to finalize the fine details in the songs that I was recording in the first place. So pre-production is stage 1. Let's talk about stage 2 that, again, so many people tend to gloss over. And that is dialing in your tones right at the source before you even think about recording or before you record. Let me give you 3 examples here. Let's talk about snare drums. Snare drums are important. So many of us will focus on fixing our snare in the mix instead of just using the right snare sample or MIDI drum snare or tuning our live snare and making sure our live snare is mic'd up right in the first place. Now, if you have experience, this might be obvious, but believe me, people send me mixes all of the time saying they're looking for, I don't know, the snare drum on the Black Album or Whitechapel snare or take your pick snare. It doesn't really matter. And then I'll listen to the snare in their mix and it's not even close to what they're going for. And it's not a mixing problem, it's a source problem. The same thing goes for guitar tones. People will say, I want a guitar tone similar to this band or that band, or my guitar tone sounds muddy. And I hear their tone and they're using a terrible sounding IR or a terrible sounding cab, and they're not focusing on the basics. Because here's the thing, if you capture a great tone at the source, you really don't have to do much to it in the mix. And it doesn't require fancy gear or expensive gear. It just requires know-how and a little bit of planning. And the other thing I hear all of the time that kind of drives me nuts is when people will say, oh man, I recorded my vocals in a really echoey, untreated room, and they'll ask me what plugin I recommend to get rid of the echo. Well, generally I'll say, retrack your vocals, because trying to use some fancy, noise canceling plugin or something like that is sort of like sticking a band-aid on a gaping wound. It'll never sound right. The good news is you could record great sounding vocals anywhere if you just deaden your space. But what you shouldn't do is just throw up a microphone, press record, and try to fix it in the mix. It ain't gonna happen. Okay, so after step 2, then we go into recording, which is step 3, which is what most people think is actually step 1. But let's talk about step 4. Step 4 is editing. Yes, I know, editing is tedious and it sucks, but guess what? All of your favorite records feature editing to some extent or another. Yes, even records recorded back in the 1970s and 1960s. Engineers back then would splice tape together, pick the best takes. The truth is, most people don't edit because they're just lazy. It's much more fun to talk about guitar plugins and drum software than to sit there and time align and edit your tracks individually. And I can always tell when someone's lazy when they say, I want a natural sound. Just because you're editing doesn't mean you are going to create a robotic sound. Again, they've been editing in the studio for over half a century now. That's a long time. So that's why when I coach my students, I always recommend to make sure editing is an essential and a key part of your workflow that you never skip over. Okay, and after editing, you could finally sit down to mix, which I consider to be stage 5. And here's the good news. If you've done everything right up to the mixing phase, mixing is going to be super easy. A lot of mixing issues that people tend to obsess over are actually tracking issues, source issues, songwriting issues, and of course, a lack of editing. Now, number 6 is a little bit of a cheat. It's sort of part of mixing, but I wanted to include it in this list because, again, so many people skip over it, and it's simple. It's automation. Yes, EQ is important, compression's important, but I have news for you. Automation goes a long way, and especially if you're working on a more complex style of heavy music, like, I don't know, symphonic metal or something, or crazy black metal with orchestrations happening in the background. You can't just set your levels right and you're good to go. It doesn't work like that. There's no magical EQ cut or boost or compression hack or plugin that you could buy. You have to use automation to make everything fit together. Simple level goes a long way, or I should say the manipulation of level that fluctuates throughout your arrangement and song. Automation is one of the most powerful elements within the mixing process, and unfortunately most people skip over it because it just seems boring. It's a lot more fun to talk about plugins. But I have news for you. The more experience you have, if you stick around long enough in this game, I could promise you automation will become your favorite part of the mixing process once you realize just how powerful it actually is. Then finally, after everything has been taken care of, all of your automation is done, your mix is done, you've gotten things right at the source, your song is banging in the first place, and your pre-production almost sounds like a final record, then you could worry about mastering. I get people sending me mixes all the time saying, hey, what mastering process should I use? And I'll listen to their mix. I'm like, you should just start from scratch, because I could hear your guitars are out of tune, your kick drum pattern makes no sense with your breakdowns, and you have lead guitars playing on top of the vocal. Focus more on the arrangement first. Yes, mastering is important, but you have to have everything in line and set up properly before you even think about mastering. So there you have it. Those are the 4 key stages that so many amateurs tend to skip. I've been guilty of all of this myself, believe me. And plus, again, so many people send me their mixes and I hear 80 to 90% of people making these same mistakes over and over and over again. And I do not want this for you. I want you to produce pro level results with the gear and plugins and setup that you currently have. And because of this, I'm offering you direct access to my Polished Production Checklist for absolutely free. The Polished Production Checklist is a simple, straightforward PDF guide that outlines my entire process for producing pro-level tracks, regardless of the gear I'm working on. Downloading this PDF and reading it and keeping it in mind will help you focus on the right things, so you can skip over all of the mistakes that are eating up your time and probably your money. Again, the Polished Production Checklist is absolutely free right now, and you can have direct access by clicking the link below in this video's description. And also, if you're interested in picking up some Frightbox swag, I've got t-shirts and even mugs. There's a link to the Frightbox merch store below in this video's description as well. I hope you found this video informative. Hopefully it kind of set you back on the right track. And until next time, happy mixing.